Hello, my name is Nathan Brummel. I hope you're having a great day. Today, I am going to talk to you about a very intriguing person, Andrew Walls, and some of his important ideas. Now, Walls has been called one of the most important interpreters of Christianity and its missionary role in our time. And the reason is that he has three key ideas that are very insightful and helpful in missiology. Now, today what we're going to do is begin by looking at the first of his key ideas. And now in his writings, he writes about a number of things, but one crucial thing, one key idea, and what was for me, I think, the most important insight that came from Andrew Walls is his idea that Christianity is serial in its development. Now, there's something very intriguing here, very original. And when I began reading his writings and I came across this idea, I was astounded by its originality and then came to see that, yes, this new theory of his paradigm is something that the facts seem to fit into. So the first key idea of the three big ideas, I think, that are important in Wall's thought is that Christian expansion, that is the growth of the Christian church, is serial in its development. So that's what we're going to look at here first. Walls sees the history of the rise and growth and movement of the Christian church as serial in its development. Gornick explains what this means. He says the first key idea in Wall's thought is that the spread of Christianity has not been progressive, but serial in development. That is, Christian expansion is not linear in movement, but rather a series of movements forward and backward, of advancement and recession. Such continuous shifting, in Wall's view, is due in large measure to its vulnerability manifest in the incarnation, cross, and the earthen vessel. Historically, and right before our eyes, the heartlands of Christian witness shift. The margins become the new centers. Now, there's some very intriguing things going on here. See, the problem is this. Historically, people, when they thought about the rise and development and the growth of Christianity, they thought in terms of there being, for example, a strong heartland, a place where Christianity was strong. And then from there, what would happen, according to this paradigm, is that Christian missionaries and ministers would go out, and the result is that Christianity would begin to grow slowly larger and larger from the center. So you'd have a center that was like a homeland, and from there Christianity would just continue to spread out, and it was sort of a progressive thing. It grew here, and then it continued to grow in other areas. Well, Walls is going to challenge that. He begins by discussing the transition from the early church being a Jewish Christian church to it becoming, within a century, a primarily Gentile Christian church. So that was quite a change. Within a remarkably short period of time, Christianity ceased to be demographically a Jewish phenomenon centered in Jewish Palestine. Initially, all the people probably who were in the upper room on Pentecost Sunday were ethnic Jews. Maybe a few exceptions, but as a rule, those who were saved in the early church were Jewish believers. They'd grown up in the covenant, and they recognized that Jesus of Nazareth was the promised Messiah. Now, it's true, though, of course, that from early dates, we find now mission outreach happening in Samaria, of all places, with Gentiles being saved there. And then we suddenly have the growth of a church in Antioch in Syria, where people were first called Christians. And then we had the Apostle Paul beginning his missionary journeys in Asia Minor, which involved him bringing, yes, the gospel to the synagogues, but when he was rejected by the Jews, then he would go also to the Gentiles as well. But see, at that period of time, we could say that the heartland of Christianity was still in Jerusalem and among ethnic Jews. But what happened is that in a very short period of time, the heartland of Christianity moved towards a new expression and a new demography, that is among Greeks, and in a new cultural context, that is a Greek culture. And so very quickly, Christianity was dispersed across the Eastern Mediterranean, then of course beyond the eastern part. Now at first, the Gentile mission was a byproduct of the Messianic movement that was centered in the temple and in Jerusalem. And it involved many Jews, whether from Judea or Galilee, who embraced Jesus as the Messiah. So we could say that the land of Israel was the first heartland of the Christian church. But then what happened is that soon Antioch in Syria, and then Ephesus on the west coast of Asia Minor, and then in Egypt, Alexandria became centers of the Christian faith. As time went on, North Africa, and then even Rome began to be included in the Christian heartlands. But notice what happens next. There's then a dramatic change as barbarian Europe becomes the heartland of Western Christianity. What is striking about Wall's interpretation of what happened in the history of Christianity is that he sees that what happens is that there is a heartland of Christianity, but it's not like the growth of the Christian church is just like slowly emanating out from that. Instead, what he sees is that there are heartlands, and there might be a little bit of mission work done like way on some outskirts in some other areas, but what can happen is that suddenly those areas in the sovereign providence of God become the heartland, a new heartland, and then what happens is that early heartlands dissolve and break apart and lose their Christian witness. So listen to Walls describe what happens in the rise of Christianity in Western Europe. He says, the significance of this process of transmission became evident only when the overextended frontiers of the Western Empire collapsed under the weight of the barbarians in a sequence of fierce and nasty little wars, and when the provinces of the Eastern Empire, which could point to the tombs of the most glorious martyrs and to the brightest treasures of Christian spirituality and scholarship, took on a new existence as Islamic states. Once again, the survival of the Christian faith as a major force in the world depended on it having crossed a cultural frontier. Against all expectations, the future of Christianity lay with the barbarians. The Christian heartlands moved from the urban centers of Mediterranean civilization with their advanced technology and developed literary tradition to a new setting among peasant cultivators and semi-settled raiders. A new model of Christianity developed among the Celtic and Germanic peoples between the Atlantic and the Carpathians, and another took its most distinctive shape among the Slavic peoples. So what Walls is saying is it's a myth that the spread of Christianity was something that was smooth, gradual, and linear. What happened instead is that areas that had been the heartland of Christianity, for example, places like Syria or Alexandria in Egypt, would, in the early Middle Ages, be overrun by Islam, for example. And so areas that had been the center of Christianity, the heartland, suddenly collapsed. Whereas suddenly, in surprising ways, suddenly barbarians in Europe become located in what is a new heartland of Christianity. So he says that there was no smooth, gradual, linear development of Christianity. Rather, he says the Christian faith would be in recession in one area while it would be growing in another area. In fact, Walls claims that Christianity survived in the way of cross-cultural diffusion. He says, in each case, a threatened eclipse of Christianity was averted by its cross-cultural diffusion. Crossing cultural boundaries has been the lifeblood of historic Christianity. Now that is something that is very striking to me. Notice what he's saying is that it is the cross-cultural spreading and diffusion of Christianity that has actually given it fresh blood and has actually helped the Christian church survive. So it's not like you have these ancient homelands and then slowly, gradually from there, Christianity just keeps spreading out in every direction. No, what instead happens is that sometimes even on the edges of things, Christianity in its heartland, might send out just a couple of missionaries that have a huge impact way on the frontiers. And what happens though is what's on the frontier in the cross-cultural context, suddenly, before you know it, that area, by the grace of God, becomes a new heartland of Christianity, and then the old heartlands fade out due to persecution or apostasy or other reasons. Now, this is rather striking given the fact that Christians are often a little bit skeptical about cross-cultural missions and might wonder why it is important. They might think, well, what Christianity should do is just continue to grow within its own cultural context in a gradual way. But what Walls is saying, if that's how things are simply done by the church, then the church is going to die out. Because historically, the way in which the church grows is by the gospel crossing barriers, while back home, a mother church might wither away. Now, we see that, of course, now in the 20th century. We see how at one time England was a place that sent out a lot of missionaries. Now, church membership in England is very small. And other places that the English had sent missionaries, like China, are now new homelands of Christianity. So notice it's not like the English church remains strong, and from the English church remaining strong, the gospel goes to other areas while the homeland there stays strong. No, the homeland has almost collapsed. So he said, it is also noteworthy that most of the energy for the frontier crossing has come from the periphery rather than from the center. Now that also is a striking point there. Notice that he says that the energy for the transmission of Christianity to a new people group doesn't come from the center. It's not like, the mother church back at home where there's a ton of resources is responsible for the fact that the gospel is crossing that cultural barrier. No, he says often that energy comes from the periphery, that is, from Christians who are far from the center of things, as it were. So he makes a very intriguing point here. He argues that the growth of Christianity often comes from the periphery. For example, the heartland of early Christianity included Asia Minor. The barbarians in Western and Central Europe were on the periphery. Outreach to these areas was on the periphery of the church's work. That is, the Christian church did not throw a lot of work and labor into that. Christianity threw a lot of work into Christianizing Asia Minor, for example. So Walls makes a striking claim when he says, crossing cultural boundaries has been the lifeblood of historic Christianity. Now, I think Christians are often too proud. They say, well, it's our culture that has been Christian for so long.